Hey, ladies, gentlemen, and transgenders, welcome to the 14th episode of the Slothcast, a Heroes of the Storm podcast that helps you get better at the game. I'm your friendly neighborhood Latino Narsa, and just this week I learned while Sylvanas didn't go to the Olympics, she has no time for games. This week, we are back with an extra big episode since we took last week off, but bringing you all the information you didn't know you needed, I'm not doing alone. Oh, no. This week, I'm joined by a legend in the European amateur scene, a strong theory crafter and Division 1 player in the Heroes Lounge. He is directly and indirectly a source of many good memes, and he never feeds. Welcome back to the show, Froge.
Hello.
So, how are you doing? Are you over your little obsession with the Dota yet?
I mean, I just watched a few sets of the TI. That was it.
Yeah, I guess you need to catch some of the final. I watched some of it myself, and I have to admit it is pretty hype.
Yeah, but I'm doing fine. We're playing in Lounge later today again.
Seems good. Do you have an easy opposition this time?
Well, we have Gorge out, so yeah, totally.
Gorge, for those that don't know, are a really, really strong team in the Elite Division in the Heroes Lounge, and now they're going to play Froge, so that's going to be interesting. I'm going to catch that game for sure, but going over to our second co-host for today, he stepped in on really short notice as Ray, that was going to be on the show, had to sit out as a tree fell on his house. Like, literally, I'm not making that up. We are very happy to have him here again, guesting us for the third episode in a row. We all know him as a solid master level player and are happy to welcome back UwImFabolous.
The name is getting better.
It is, isn't it?
I actually have a note for the Gorge Good Old thingy. The first time I played with my team in the Open Division Cup, we beat them without ever practicing before. And then we renamed it to Grief Got Old afterwards and kept that name just to meme them. It was pretty great.
Sounds like a good meme, and I do love good memes. So yeah, your Open Division team, how are you guys doing these days?
We disbanded yesterday.
Oh, you did?
Yes.
Well, that doesn't sound very fortunate.
It's okay. I'm not too. It's not too bad.
Yeah.
I don't bother.
Hopefully you can find another team that you can play some organized with, so you don't have to sit outside and look in at us all having fun in a coordinated play. Moving on from Fabulous here and Froge, that we've seen plenty of times. Our last guest this week should need no introduction, but he will still get one, and as he is a returning guest on the Slothcast all the way from across the Atlantic, one of the men that knows the most about Heroes of the Storm in the whole world and is therefore honorary EU. Welcome back to the show, CavalierGuest.
That introduction was awesome. Thanks for having me. It's good to be back on the Slothcast.
Indeed, it's very good to have you back now. A couple of things that we need to ask you about. Firstly, you are known for watching every minute of competitive HOTS on the planet. And with the Eastern Clash going down this weekend, that's probably put a bump into your sleep schedule.
A little bit. I actually did not make it all the way through the finals, but I've watched up to the semis and then I had to fall asleep. So I'm going to finish that later on. But generally speaking, if there's a professional game of Heroes of the Storm, I watch it.
That seems good. A man has to do his research. Speaking of research, since we talked with you last time, since you were on the show last time, you have kind of constituted, is that a word? Anyway, your partnership with the Gale Force Esports, that's grown into a real thing. And how is that going?
It's going really well. It's nice to have the backing of an org, especially an org that sponsors a pro team. It's kind of funny, the more time I spend creating content, the less time I have to actually play the game. So people are always coming in and asking me, what rank are you? Like, what have you been doing? And I'm like, I have not actually been playing the game because I have so much work to do. around the game, watching the replays, watching all of the professional games, doing the analysis, writing guides. So it's nice. At the same time, it's kind of funny that people keep asking me, what rank are you? As if that's the most meaningful metric. So it's nice that I can point to the fact that I have this partnership with Garrosh Esports and be like, there's a reason that the professional team or sponsored professional team has me as their primary content creator for the game.
Yeah, there's obviously something you're doing right when GFE pays you money to do it.
Yeah.
That's really great to hear. Looking forward to more coming out of that end, as it's great to have more people access to your content. As many people noticed, we didn't have a show last week, so we're bringing out this top-of-the-line crew today to talk a lot of heroes in an extra long episodes, as we'll look into the latest balance patch, once again talk some Garrosh, but as Cavalier is here, we of course have to talk some drafting. We also have a fun bonus segment for all of you, but before we move into that, we have to talk a little bit about the Heroes Global Championship. I'm not going to go into and ask how many bits you've shared for which teams, but rather the Eastern Clash final just finished now a couple of hours ago, with L5 taking the victory over MVP Black 4-1. Is that surprising?
Yes and no. It's surprising because MVP Black is supposed to be one of the strongest rosters, one of the strongest incarnations that they've ever had. So no one is expecting them to lose, really. Everyone expects them to win this event overall. But after the first couple days of play, there were some notable holes in their drafting, some really fundamental drafting mistakes, as well as I think it was pretty apparent there was either a misunderstanding in the meta or some hero pool issues. And normally Kyocha is the drafter for MVP Black. He's one of the best drafters in the world. But with the role swap to support, maybe he didn't have time to prep, or maybe it's affecting his ability to draft because it's changing his perspective or something. But there was something going on in MVP Black's drafting, and their drafting was just not good at all the entire tournament. When your drafting goes from world class to making fundamental mistakes, you're going to have bad games. And against teams that were lower tier than them, they managed to pull out wins regardless. But against teams that are even with them mechanically, they couldn't consistently pull off victories. So
we still had the 3 Korean teams in the top 3 positions, with MVP Black coming in second after L5, and then Tempest in the 3rd spot. But after that, we saw the Chinese teams with CE taking the 4th spots. They look pretty decent. Any thoughts about the Chinese region?
It'd be really nice if at any point in the history of Heroes of the Storm, the top Chinese teams could actually come to an international event with their full rosters. Mm-hmm. Pretty good, because I don't think we've seen that since ever. Like, I'm sure if there's ever been a BlizzCon or anything where we've actually had the real rosters for the Chinese teams. SPT was the #1 seed in China for a variety of odd reasons. We won't get too much into detail there, but they were the first Chinese team out at Eastern Clash. And then CE also had a sub, and they made it a little bit further because their sub was a little bit better of a player, and they had less hero pool issues with their sub. So their drafting was able to stay more true to what they're used to doing. But China just needs to not have visa issues. We have no idea. We have no idea how good China is relative to other regions because we've never seen a Chinese team play a Korean team at full strength. We've never seen that.
Well, I think not like since Gold Week last year when MVP Black was playing there.
Yeah, unless someone goes to China. Like the last time we saw full strength Chinese teams playing full strength Korean teams was when it was Gold Club World Championship, where people went to China because people are already in China. They don't need to worry about having travel issues.
Yeah. We even had E-Star just stay home because of the same thing.
Yeah, they just couldn't get out the tournament.
And the backup team came from a minor region.
Yeah.
It wasn't. it wasn't even that we saw like a full Chinese roster of like the tier 4 or tier 5 team. It's just that we just didn't have a Chinese team.
Yeah, apparently they didn't. Apparently they didn't have the time to get another Chinese team there or something. Like they didn't have the time to go through all the bureaucracy, so they got another Taiwanese team instead, which was apparently easier to organize.
Yeah,
Something like
I
that.
guess so. The Eastern Clash being in Taiwan, that would make some sense. And speaking of Taiwan, the minor regions, any team impress you?
I'm always impressed actually by the quality of the minor Asian teams, just because they come from such a small area in terms of population that play the game, and they're consistently managing to be near the top of the professional HOTS world. They lose to the major region teams, but they'll beat NA, they'll beat China, they'll lose to Korea, they'll lose to EU. But in some other regions of HGC, these would be at a minimum 5-6 ranked teams, and they're doing it with basically no support and a very small player base. And a big advantage that they have is that Korean Hero League ladder is actually really consistent, and they get to play on the Korean Hero League ladder, and that's where they get the majority of their practice from. They don't get it from scrims; they get it from playing Hero League. They're just like grinding it out. So I'm always impressed with them in that sense, but they didn't stand out for me this particular tournament more so than usual. It's just like, yeah, that's the performance we've come to expect from these teams. They didn't do anything above, but they haven't dropped down at all. They're still where they should be.
Yeah, it's also something that you mentioned there, like they don't have the structure. Like something I think a lot of people forget is how Europe, NA, Korea have the HGC. Like it's China too, I guess, but they have a little bit different structure than the rest of the regions. But these 4 regions, they play on a regular basis against other good teams in the league system, and the minor regions, they just don't do that, and that kind of affects how the quality of a region develops.
Absolutely, you can't be better in any competitive sport than the best team you can beat. Which is one, and people bring this up in regards to Fnatic. They're like, well, Fnatic is at the top of the world right now, but the problem is Fnatic's at the top of the world right now. No one's competing with them. So how do you improve as Fnatic? But the minor region teams don't have that problem because they have constant things to look up to, but they're not getting that practice because no one can play them really.
Maybe Fnatic can scrim Froge's team, Need for Feed, and they can pick up something from there. Speaking of the minor regions and like how things can develop, we also had the Western Clash just a little while ago, and we haven't had an episode since that. So we saw, just to get it out of the way first, Fnatic, as Cav mentioned here, are so good right now. Like they went through the whole Western Clash, they won it in a matter that seemed like it was easy, and they didn't drop a single map through the whole tournament. Like, how good are Fnatic now, really?
They're insane. There's really no other way to put it. Fnatic is playing out of their minds, and the last time we had something like this was last year. MV Black went on a 42-game win streak, and they went through Spring, Globals, and Gold Club and Super League into the Summer Globals. They ended up dropping a game. I think they might have dropped one game at Gold Club, not Gold Club, but it was Gold Club. They might have dropped one game at Gold Club, and then they dropped one set at Summer Globals. So almost 6 months where they didn't drop a single set, and 5 months where they didn't drop a single game in competitive. And when that happened, people were like, we're never going to see this again. We're never going to see an international tournament where a team doesn't drop a single game, because every region's improving. The gap will never be this big again. And then Fnatic came along and was like, no, we can do that. That's fine. We got this.
We just 5 Swedish boys. We'll just kick everyone's ass.
They still have some work to do before they can match that win streak, though. But right now they're on 11. They're on an 11 map win streak.
Yeah, they're only a quarter of the way through, but it's still like incredibly impressive.
And it would have looked much better if they didn't drop that game against Playing Ducks in the last weekend of Ages Europe.
Not game, set. They lost 3-1.
Yeah. Which like Chris, the ranged DPS player on Playing Ducks, in his Discord and subject channel and stuff, and he's like, we didn't even scrim that week. We have no idea how that happened, and yeah.
I mean, it was a combination of drafting problems from Fnatic, and Fnatic, I think, didn't take the match seriously at first.
No.
And which is just something that's the concern, right? The concern is always that you're going to be in a situation where you're doing really well as a team, you're going against a team that you don't think is really worth your time, so you don't do scouting, you don't do prep the same way you do when you're taking a match really seriously, and then you show up and make a couple of mistakes, and suddenly they're winning, and a lot of teams at that point will panic. They'll be like, "Oh my god, we can't drop this," and that puts a lot of pressure on them because they know they didn't prepare the way they usually do. Be like, we still got to perform anyway, even though we didn't prepare correctly, and then that pressure can sometimes make them worse, make them make a lot of mistakes, and just becomes this cycle of defeat, which is what happened.
Also in the Western Clash, we saw the teams from that's what I was thinking about earlier. The teams from Brazil and ANC, Nomia and Red Canids did like expected, I guess. They aren't better than they are, and they have really strong competition from especially Europe, to a certain degree NA that looked decent in this in the Western Clash. Just to drop by that really quick, how was your impression of NA? Has it gotten better or worse since the global at DreamHack?
Team synergy has gotten better for NA
Synergy?
teams. Yeah, their ability to.
I mean,
so when
which team do you mean? You said team synergy.
Well, no, they're like.
That's
the synergy of the teams.
Oh, you actually didn't get it. I thought it was just like Finland humor or something. It's like, I'm going to show how to tell a joke.
Confused.
Okay.
Oh my god!
I thought you were talking about a specific team, and then I was really confused.
Because synergy's an EU team. I'm talking about NA teams. There was a pick of Fnatic did on Tomb of the Spider Queen against a Vala Ariel that was at Midseason Brawl, where Breeze would just regularly rotate down and he would hide behind the wall and he would look, and as soon as the gank wasn't going to happen, he just left. He didn't even use his abilities. He did that like 3 times, and the 3rd time Vala stepped a little bit too far forward. He got a burrow charge impale. Literally, as the burrow charge hit, like within the same 10th of a second that the burrow charge hit, the Genji, who was also in that lane, hit his Swift Strike onto the Vala. That's the level of execution and synergy and precise timing that top tier teams have. NA, 6 months ago, the Swift Strike hit after a second and a half, sometimes 2 seconds. NA is to the point now where the Swift Strike is hitting at less than a second, sometimes less than half a second. So in that sense, they've more than doubled their responsiveness and their timing in terms of coordinating cooldowns, having better positioning in team fights, stuff like that. That might not seem like a really, really big difference, but at the high end, everything makes a big difference because it's literally down to seconds in many cases. In Heroes of the Storm, it's a very fast-paced game. That said, their drafting is still bad. Every NA team has notable drafting weaknesses that just get exploited, and pretty much every EU team is aware of those weaknesses, and they just got bodied in every draft at Midseason Brawl, or Western Clash, excuse me. I think there's going to be 1 or 2 drafts that an NA team came out even or ahead out of, if you count all 3 NA teams, that's a lot of games. That's not a good ratio.
Because like to give them like a little bit of optimism too, like GFE on Brexis, they have kind of found a thing there, haven't they? They've looked really solid on that map.
Yeah, and it helps when a team has a specialty like that. It helps when they have that map because they scrim it a lot, they practice a lot, they understand the drafts for it really, really well. They understand what they need to do to win against certain compositions, and GFE in particular has started to treat Braxis as an entire map rather than some laning arrangements, more so than any other NA team. Because there was this trend for a long time where it was like 4-1, and you were just in your lane. And then people started doing, well, what if we have a global in the 4-man, and occasionally the global rotates up to the 2, and so it was like a 1.5 to 3.5. Like that was a thing. And then we have they started playing Valera and Zeratul occasionally on the map, and then it was like constantly stealth rotating, looking for ganks, and it's interesting that they have a specialty and they're starting to finally treat it as a whole map problem, and I'm looking forward to them thinking seriously about how well they understand the draft on Braxis and seeing if they can figure out, how do we draft on other maps in that same way where we actually understand every possible outcome and how the draft affects the strategies that we are able to run on a particular map.
The other NA teams, Tempestorm, didn't look especially convincing to me. I was even kind of disappointed by the showing that they put forward. But Team Freedom, on the other hand, that was kind of fun. Their first international tournament, their first big LAN event like this, and taking a map, or like really taking Team Liquid actually to the brink.
Yeah, and Team Freedom has always been on the verge. Like literally since day one of HGC, people have been saying Team Freedom is on the verge of being a top tier team. They're just missing a couple of things. And that was always, and it's been the refrain for a while. It's like Team Liquid's on the verge, Team Liquid's on the verge, and they kept not happening. But then they picked up Cure. Cure gave them a significant advantage in terms of hero pool. He plays a large number of heroes really, really competently, which is a big advantage when it comes to drafting. And his execution is on those heroes. It's just like so good. In addition to that, he has a lot of good input on drafting. He has a lot of good ideas. He's not quiet in comms at all. He's always giving that constant, they're here, they're doing this, which is information that's really, really important. So there was a big pickup for them. And we saw, the result. They instantly went from a team that was struggling to be in the top 5 to a team that is comfortably in the top 3 in NA.
Yeah, because they have had like a really, really big rise from like being down in the crucible part of the table, like instead being in the top. That's pretty impressive. Is it only down to Cure, or?
I mean, that's the only thing they changed,
yeah.
Right? They had the roster of 5 people. They were struggling. They replaced one person with Cure, and suddenly they're in the top 3. You can make an argument that each individual player has been putting the time in, and they have, to improve. But by far the biggest change that you can point to is Cure, and it's not just that he's a good player. It's his comms, it's his communication, it's his understanding of the game. And whenever you add a really knowledgeable person to a roster, who also has a big hero pool, the depth of your draft is going to improve. The variety of comms you can pull off is going to improve, and he's brought that to the team, and it does matter quite a bit.
We have to move on from HGC, but before we go there, as I mentioned, the minor regions, etc. Red Canids, Nomia did okay. There are decent teams. I'm a huge fan of Fat94 of Nomia. Seems like an awesome guy. I met him at DreamHack. It was totally great. And I've read now that both Jace Ritter from Red Canids are moving to Canada to play in NA, and what was the name of that? Arcanet, yeah. He's moving to EU to play in EU. Fabulous, have you considered moving to NA to get a free spot in HGC?
I don't have the money to move, I guess. Feels bad, man. But I've talked to Arcana a lot about this. moving to EU and stuff. I've also seen him coach a open division team in the EU because he has friends on that team. I don't know. So yeah, he's really putting stuff into the scene.
Yeah, and of course, for those that haven't heard the story, he before the mid-season brawl had to choose between his education and playing heroes because he couldn't do both at the same time. His university was pretty strict and blah blah blah. Long story. But he chose to play the game, so that's a lot of respect in that, and I hope he's going to succeed in here in Europe. But of course, it's not easy coming to Europe, even though you're obviously a good player. But yeah, it's going to be exciting to see how that works out for him. We're going to move on. This week also saw something else really exciting happen as a balance patch was released together with a new hero, which we of course have to talk about. So first, Garrosh has now been live for half a week and after a period on the PTR. And the most important thing first, Cavalier. Is he a solo tank?
No.
No.
Good talk.
So Blizzard lies to us.
So I did an interview with Blizzard at BlizzCon 2016, and I asked them, we talked about tanking, and I asked them, what to you defines a solo tank? And their answer wasn't very good. It was basically circular at first. The answer I got was literally, it's the hero that can tank. And I'm like, okay, well, what does that mean? And their overall response basically involved, it's the hero that can stand in front and not die. It's literally the hero that can absorb a certain amount of punishment. And I was like, well, what about initiation? What about mobility? And at least this one developer flat out said to me, well, you don't really think those things are necessary for a tank per se. And this was on the back of Varian's release, right? So we were addressing this as a general question, but we were specifically talking about Varian. Blizzard did a Q&A a few months ago because they did a lot of Q&As around the release of 2.0, where the same question was asked, and they updated it to include initiation, health, and a certain amount of tinkability, mitigation mechanics, sustain, whatever, something that keeps them alive in fights and allows them to absorb a certain amount of damage. And so survivability, initiation, which is better by a huge margin. And they also added in what am I thinking of? They didn't exactly say vision, but they started to realize that in the professional scene, tanks are often necessary for maintaining vision, warding. So they said they like it when some tanks have escapes, but it's a significant increase, like an improvement to their definition. And I think they looked at Garrosh and they're like, well, he has survivability because of his trait, and he has initiation because all he has to do is hit his Q and throw someone back into his team, and it's good. The problem is his Q is on like a half-second delay, and the targeting area is visible, so no good player will ever get hit by an unassisted Q, which means his initiation's not reliable, and he doesn't have an escape of any kind. So if you have no mobility, you have no reliable initiation, you're not a tank. You're not. Not by anyone's definition, even Blizzard's.
The interesting thing though is like the Q, even though like the targeting area is pretty wide, like at the edge. So some heroes with large hitboxes, like even pretty reasonable players, if they're playing like Keltas, if they happen to be in range, it's quite difficult for them to actually dodge. And the fact that he has like if you do some rudimental, like if you do some quick math on average against most damage sources from full health, his hit points, like his hit points at level are somewhere around 2.8k. Like if you are like counting how much damage it takes to kill Garrosh, it's like 2.8k at level 1. So it actually makes him tanky enough that he can face check and walk out. So he's, I would say, closer than his kit would indicate to being a solo tank. And then it's like, and then it works pretty well in Heroic because people do just walk into queues.
Yeah, I guess so. That certainly helps. But yeah, because they said in his trailer, like, he's a durable solo warrior or solo tank. I can't remember the exact wording, but like, they kind of said like, okay, finally we're giving you another solo tank, because like everyone been complaining forever that we haven't gotten one. And yeah, I agree. And I'm not sure it counts as initiation to be able to throw your Chromie into the enemy backline. But yeah, maybe if they gave him the possibility to throw himself. But I'm not sure how that.
How does he do that? Is he grabbing his own legs? And
He has a level 4 talent called By His Bootstraps, and he just, picks his bootstraps and throws himself into the enemy team.
Seems good.
Yeah, I would like to see that. Fabulous. Your thoughts on Garrosh? Have you gotten some time to play him?
I haven't played him, but I've seen him, and he doesn't really feel like a solo tank. He is pretty weak if you have only one support in the team and he's alone tanking. But what I've seen is like if the enemy wants Tascom, for example, like Oriel Tas with the Valor, he feels pretty strong actually if he gets shielded at 20% HP and then gets another Oriel heal and blah blah blah. He just never dies. But then again, I think he's really skill dependent. And I've seen Trash Garrosh doing really shitty stuff, and I've also been getting whacked pretty hard by other Garrosh players. So I can't really tell how good he actually is because I haven't played him, and I can't really tell how good the people are that I've seen play him.
I've also been like consistently tilted by heroic Rhaegars biting into Garrosh and then getting thrown behind towers and then wondering what went wrong.
Yeah, it's always fun when a new hero comes out like that, and especially when they have such playmaking potential. Like Garrosh has, like a friend of the show and of ours, Alchemy, is a really good player by all means. Didn't play
Really
that
though?
game for a little time. Didn't play the game as much. Just came back. Yeah, I can sub for Scrim, no worries. The enemies picked Garrosh and he gets thrown around all the time because like he just wasn't prepared for it. But yeah, it takes a little while to get.
He was also playing Keotas, who has the really awkward combination where every spell except his Q, the cast range is Garrosh's pull range, and he also has one of the largest hitbox in the game, as well as having no mobility. So it's like and also pretty much every cast animation stops you momentarily, which is like the worst possible combination you can have against Garrosh.
But I have that problem. I had that problem in my first Euro League game when I faced Garrosh. I've never played against him before in quick match, and then I suddenly realized, oh wait, okay, level 1, I'm getting grabbed, thrown behind the tower, I'm dead. Feels bad, man.
Which it's worth noting is something that's pretty unique to Garrosh. There's not really another hero that has that dynamic, not really another warrior that has that dynamic of anti-siege. Like you can't step up to them in lane, or you can get thrown behind the towers. And the range on that throw is pretty decent. Like if you're past the 3/4 point in most lanes, you can get thrown behind towers. So you're talking about compositions that are early siege compositions, and they're trying to push in. He works really well as anti-siege. He's an anti-siege tank. The throw also works relatively well as peel, so you can call him an anti-dive tank to some degree. And so he may have a niche as a solo tank in specific drafts on specific maps, but you're not going to see him picked up as like a new rack replacement. No one's going to be like, we can, the new rack's banned. We would have taken a new rack here. We can take Garrosh instead. That's fine.
Yeah, he won't feel that full role. But
Praxis though, his weaknesses are. Oh, okay, so you kind of don't need to tank in Braxis formats, but it's
Sure.
also like. But his kit is also really good for point control and anti-siege as well. Like it's pretty painful to play a Zarya into a Garrosh.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And since Zarya has very few counters already, it's nice to have one more. Unless you're a Zarya main or a Zarya one trick, in which case you're like, God damn
it. Listen, stop
Feels
griefing me.
ruiny, man.
It feels ruiny, man. So what could you like picture yourself, since you don't want to roll him as a solo tank? What kind of hero would you like to have together with him? Like, do you need another warrior, or could like a melee assassin, just like Alarak, Thrall, something like that? Could that work? Is that enough?
I would like to, if I were drafting him, I would put him together with either a low mobility, unkillable tank like Arthas, because you can initiate for the Arthas with Into the Fray. You can just be like, go! And then Arthas is on top of the enemy team, and he pops army, and nothing gets away from him, and he doesn't die, and you're fine. It's actually really, really nice, especially because every point of armor is more valuable than the point before it. So the armor from Into the Fray is really valuable on tanks that already have significant armor. Or I would like to see him in some sort of delay, macro composition where you have a hero like Li Ming who has a certain amount of poke and can delay, say, a tribute or a tower on towers or an altar on Towers of Doom for a while, and then you have a split pusher. And Garrosh's job is just to stand in front of the Ming, and if someone tries to dive on her, you just throw that person away. And that's all he does. He just stands there and creates some space. Because with his armor trait, he can absorb a reasonable amount of poke, as long as he's dodging really high impact skill shots. And then you can never get on top of someone that he's protecting until he's dead. And so because he can absorb a lot of poke, and because it's hard to kill him, if he's staying at a certain range, then he would be good at that. He would be good at delaying, or at least guarding a delay hero. He'd be good at that.
I'm excited to see how he works out in the current meta and stuff. It's always exciting to get a new hero, and the last couple of heroes we've gotten, they've pretty much moved straight into the game, kind of. I'm thinking with Stukov, seeing a lot of play, and same did Genji, stuff like that. So yeah, hopefully it will be fun to see how that develops. With Garrosh, there was also what I'm looking for. Sorry about this. The patch, with some balance changes. It wasn't like a lot, so it's not like really much. But we can look through it quickly. Firstly, let's all share. For Hanamura has been temporarily removed from all game modes. Yahoo!
Finally.
Yeah, okay. I was about to ask, like, are anyone not happy with this? But I guess not.
The funny thing is, I liked Hanamura in its initial incarnation because I thought it was interesting to have a map where the objective was something that you did later on, and it was always better to push in the early game and try and secure a building advantage and get ahead in experience, and then you did the objective, and then they changed it so that the cards give experience, and I'm like, okay, that's whatever. But then removing the sappers made the map so incredibly griefable, and I just think that when you design a map that can be griefed, you have to accept that it will be griefed, and it's such a big mistake on Blizzard's part for that to happen. And we've seen this occasionally before, because when Towers of Doom first came out, we saw some grief, but eventually you cap all 6 bell towers and the game ends. Like, you can't prevent a game on towers from ending forever, whereas on Hanamura you can.
Yeah, I was also kind of excited for the map in the beginning. It looked good, it was pretty, had all the colors, and I like different things, and the map was obviously something completely different, and yeah, but it just wasn't that fun to play. I was also looking forward to a lot of skirmishes, fights all the time in the middle going around, but yeah, I don't know. Another battleground that saw some changes a while ago, actually, in the Stukov patch, but wasn't actually announced before now, was Dragonshire, where the Dragon Knight received some buffs. You're not going to go through them all. Let's just say he's more powerful than ever before. Is this a good change to the map?
I mean, it seems fine. It was Dragonshire in many people's minds was one of the most balanced maps in the entire pool. So any changes to it, you got to look at it and be like, did they actually improve the map, or is it worse? Is it the same? It seems like it's just basically the same. Maybe the scaling means that the first Dragon Knight, maybe the first couple Dragon Knights, are a little bit stronger than they were, but the strategy still hasn't changed. It's always hold one shrine, try and get an advantage in lane. When you have an advantage in lane, get both shrines and then get the Dragon Knight, and then do you need experience, or can you open up a win condition? And it means that if you do all that correctly, you're rewarded slightly more than you were, but it's not worth. There's no fundamental change to the strategy just because the Dragon Knight got a buff.
And it's still pretty hard to get as well in the early game.
Yeah, so it's nice, but it's just nice.
Yeah, that's kind of what it feels to me too. Like it doesn't change anything really, but yeah, if you do secure or manage to secure a Dragon Knight in the early game, it just feels more rewarding. As yeah, from before it didn't do much at all. So yeah. So that's probably not going to change a lot of things, but it's interesting to see them change up those kind of things when they feel it's needed to. Some heroes got some changes, like Oriole, Probius, Diva, and Sonya only got minor changes that aren't really worth talking about. But Ragnaros got some number changes. Quick question, is any of this really interesting? AKA, does it have an impact?
Not really.
It has an impact, but it's not really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, they nerfed him again, right? Or did I miss anything?
They like shifted the balance of it. They like shifted his talents around a bit, and like they made his Q build worse, and I think they tried to make E build better. But then what ends up happening is that Q build is still the best, but worse. So rip.
Yeah, but he wasn't viable before either. So
I mean,
I
he
don't
was
understand.
like, he was like, I'd say Rags. The fact that he has Molten Core and so for a smash is like, unless his numbers are actually abysmal.
Yeah, but he's
ability-
losing lane to a lot of people. So
But like, he has too much. Like, as long as you're not like losing objectives over the back of it, it's not like losing lane will make you. Like the fact that you have Molten Core, you can and insane amounts of Wave Core still, you can kind of afford to just slowly lose and get to a late game power spike, which is basically his reason to exist, and has been for a while. So.
Yep.
But it does feel like Ragnaros is just moving towards being more and more niche.
I mean,
Like he was super strong when he came out. He was doing good in the solo lanes and stuff. He got nerfed a bit, got a little bit niche, and now he's kind of just changed more.
see ya.
I mean, he used to be a walking. Now he's a walking trait. Before he was a walking trait that could solo lane. So they've removed a lot of what makes him really good. Funny thing is, and this doesn't apply to professional play at all, but it gives you an idea of how important macro and wave clear is. And every league below Masters, Lava Wave has a much higher win rate than Smash.
yeah, because nobody like.
Moves out of it.
No, it's
No,
it's
no,
like, no. You can stand. In it. You can stand in it. Like you can.
No,
Lava Wave
it's
does
just-
no damage anymore. You can legitimately stand in it.
It's because no one clears. You don't use it in team fights. That's not what you use it for. You just on cooldown, literally just throw it in a lane, and because you're gonna get all the experience from that lane, and it's gonna result in push. It results in a lot of won games.
Please don't give people a reason to play Lava Wave.
I'm sorry. I gotta. Like, it's one of the most illustrative examples of how important macro is. That in literally every league below Masters, right? So Diamond is the league where a lot of players will say people start to understand macro and actually do it correctly. And even in Diamond, Lava Wave has a much higher win rate.
Yeah.
But Lava Wave is Grieve.
It's not though. It's a really good macro tool. I have built cheese comps specifically around Lava Wave's ability to macro.
I mean, or more accurately, griefing wins games in Hero League.
Yeah.
Dance game.
You can't stop the grief. Talking about grief, the Butcher got some changes.
Rest in peace.
Yeah.
His win rate increased in Hero League though.
Yeah, immediately when I read those changes, I thought this could maybe be a buff, but then I got the impression it was not. But then we still see the win rates go up. Is that just a placebo thing, like Stockholm syndrome from the
No,
Butcher, or is he
it's-
actually better now?
It's
He's-
that
he-
Hero League players feed. That's literally it.
Hero League players do feed. That's a true statement. Basically, if you're in a game where people are dying, his quest finishes so fast and then stacks up. Objectively, his numbers were slightly nerfed, but in exchange, he got to pick a new level. He got to pick a level 1 talent. There's very few heroes where I would not be like, oh, I get to pick a level 1 talent in exchange for a 5% nerf to my numbers. I'll take that. That's a good deal. And then in addition to that, in any league where people feed or die or overextend too much, he is strictly buffed. So at worst, this was a side grade, and at best, for literally 80% of the player base, it was a strict buff.
Yeah. Like the issue with the issue I do have with this, well, essentially another rework, is that while it does make it makes him significantly better Bob Stomper, because like he was already a pretty good Bob Stomper because he abused the fact that people don't end, and then people let Butcher stack even if, and like that would work even if people don't feed. But as long as you have a Butcher who understands how his scaling works, and then he manages to farm, and people don't abuse the Butcher scaling and they don't end, and then Butcher gets stacked, and then he just crushes, because the stacked Butcher is legitimately one of the biggest power spikes in the game outside of maybe Nazebo 20.
I've seen some Butcher versus Vikings lately. That has been pretty terrible for the Vikings, to be honest. Like,
man,
max stacks after a few minutes and then just stack on and just hit things with the right click, win the game.
I'm a little jealous. I've never gotten to play the reworked Butcher or the current version of Butcher where you get those meat stacks from hero kills and you need them to finish the quest into a Vikings.
Yeah, it was mostly, okay, let's go mid lane, and when we figure out where some Vikings are, you just go there and farm them, and that worked out just fine.
I do think it's basically Gazwo tier in coordinated play at this point, though. Like, I mean, he almost was before, but he's even more Gazwo tier now.
For those of you not familiar with Gazlo in uncoordinated games, that's a compliment. Because Gazlo and uncoordinated is very hard to deal with, believe it or not.
I meant like actually he's Gazlo tier in both uncoordinated and coordinated then. Because it's really hard to deal with in uncoordinated games. But when you're like not griefing, then it's pretty easy to deal with.
Real quick, I just have to ask: did you see any Gazlo coming out from Asia in the Eastern Clash? I don't think so.
Did we see a
No.
Gazlo?
There was a Gazlo in Korea in HGC.
Yeah.
Where
that was the last round, wasn't it?
Where the set was pretty much locked down. I don't think the end results actually mattered one way or the other. I think the positions at that point were fixed. So Rich played Gazlo, and Rich plays a lot of Gazlo. He watches stream, so it wasn't too surprising, but it was still fun to watch.
Yeah, and to be honest, Rich on Gazlo could probably 1 versus 4, the 4 of us. So, yeah. But we did see Nova coming out from some Asian team. I can't remember exactly.
SPT, and it was because of the hero pool issues with the sub.
Oh yeah. Oh,
How do you end up walking into Nova by your hero pool? What is this?
you get your manager to play on the team instead of one of your star players.
Nova one-trick ponies.
You get frustrated at exactly how bad you know your draft is going to be as the main drafter, and then you're like, fuck it, I'm just going to play Nova, which is what Mikasa did, because it was Mikasa on the Nova.
I love that's international. That's a language that goes over every barrier. If you are frustrated, you just play Nova.
Nova.
Yeah, works every time in every region. We've already gone through a lot of interesting heroes talk here, and there shall be more in a sec when we return from a quick break. Welcome back, everyone. It's very good to be here with you again, both our lovely viewers, but also my panel of co-hosts. And I did mention earlier a bonus segment in today's episode, and it has arrived, as we'll talk about the history of cheese tactics in Heroes of the Storm. We jokingly touched upon this a couple of weeks ago, but Cavalier, he smelled blood in the water and said he would love to join some talk about cheese in huts. So here we are. And first, let's just start at the beginning. Cavalier, what makes a tactic a cheese tactic?
It's actually a really hard question to answer, and a lot of people argue about this vociferously on the internet constantly across a wide variety of games. And I was actually curious enough to go back, like, where did this word come from? Why do we call this sort of thing cheese? The earliest instance I could find was, it actually started in the Street Fighter II community back in the early 90s. And basically, there were a lot of strategies where you could do things where you stuck yourself in a corner and you could just run out the clock. And if people approached you, you could do like forward jumps or back jumps and then use an ability, particularly on Zangief, apparently. And I'm not sure why it was called cheese. That I still don't know why it's called cheese. Like, it was just in this one guide that I saw on the internet, which means, you know, this is 92. People must have been using it in local arcades and stuff like that, and it just sort of worked its way onto the internet. But in competitive games at a high level, cheese has basically come to be roughly defined as a strategy that if the opponent knows you're doing it in advance, won't work, and it relies on psychological factors, the opponent not knowing you're doing it, and it's usually easier to execute than it is to defend. So as long as your opponent is surprised and the level of execution is roughly even, the opponent's pretty much guaranteed to lose, because it's like the crane kick done properly, no can defense.
That's a Karate Kid reference there.
Yeah. So the crane kick is the original cheese from the 80s, and then that came into StarCraft, and then or Street Fighter. And now we have it in all competitive video games. I think that's my definition of cheese. I think it's general enough that it will apply to pretty much anything most people call cheese. A lot of people call cheese something that they just never seen before, though. It's like, I've never seen that and I lost to it, therefore it's cheese. And it's not exactly outside of the realm, right? Because we're talking about situations where if you don't have any knowledge of it as a tactic, then you're going to struggle with it.
There's also the like we used to pretty much call Cho'Gao threats cheese because they were very rarely run. It was kind of this thing where you just passed out Cho'Gao in the last rotation, and then it's like, oh wait, we can't counter Cho'Gao, we lost this game. And then then it was, I'm not sure how much of an impact Cho'Gao had in the Eastern Crash, but he actually saw a lot of play in the Korean HGC. And then it's like, is Cho'Gao a cheese strategy anymore? It's just being drafted because it's good.
Well, it's being drafted because Ariel's good.
Well, yeah, but like, at what point does, can a strategy start as cheese and then become not cheese?
Well, yeah, I mean, cannon rushing in StarCraft 2. I mean, Vikings were always considered cheesy for a long time, and now Vikings are something Liquid does. I think that's part of the definition. If your opponent doesn't see it coming, but once something becomes part of the meta and it's standard, your opponent, if they've done any kind of research at all on you as a team or on the meta in general, should always see it coming. It should always be something they're thinking about in the back of their mind. They could do this. So I think in many ways you could strongly argue that every viable strategy that any team has ever invented and then debuted at like a major event was started out as cheese. And then became part of the meta as people understood it.
Are you going to show the clip that I sent in the Discord?
Which one was
that? The video from my team back in the days in beta, where I personally, for the first time, saw cheese happening.
Oh, that one.
Yeah, you sent me something. I can't remember exactly what it was.
It's a YouTube video casted by Gillyweed, whatever. So yeah, we were facing ETC, Zagara, Brightwing, Zeratul, and what was the fifth? I don't remember. Like they went 5-man global except the Zeratul, and they would just, as soon as they hit 10, dive into our keep, because you didn't need to destroy the fort before to get to core. So they just suicided into the keep. As soon as they respawned, they jumped onto the core, put it down to 30%. We were sweating. Everyone was shouting on TeamSpeak, and we were just rushing core, trying to be faster than them. And the game ended like after 8 minutes, our core being on, I think, 12% or something. Yeah, that's essentially like what Cavalier said. Cheese is something you don't expect, and if it's happening, it's a struggle to deal with.
Yeah, I actually found it now. Neptune Gaming versus Diablo Snores with the Siege on their team. Not bad. Yeah, I can always take a look at that. Maybe use it. Oh, the layout looks so old. But yeah, because that's something that I suddenly remember now. When they used to have this all global thing where you just flew down to the opponent.
Oh yeah, Falside was the fifth one.
Yeah,
you could also use Nidus globally. You didn't need the creep to spawn it, so yeah. Suddenly 5 people in our base, while everything else was still standing. I don't fucking know what happened.
And that's kind of a predecessor to the Morales cheese, which Froge is very familiar with. As
I've ran it a few times.
Yeah, on our old team, we ran it a few times, both successfully and unsuccessfully, unfortunately, because some people can't stand in the Sanct.
Also,
but
some people don't know when to press the R button.
Yeah,
unfortunately, they use it to the tank insignificant amounts of core damage, and then we all eat apocalypse. But
yeah.
For anyone listening not familiar with the Morales cheese, also known as the Juice Pirates, it's when you draft Tyrael, Morales, and specific damage dealers to basically in the early game, you have to make sure you get a fort in a lane, and then you medevac to keep, you kill the keep, you medevac to core, you get the core usually 50%, and then as soon as medevac's up again, you medevac and the core dies. And the reason this works is because Sanctification makes you invulnerable. So you just medevac in, you do as much damage as you can, you sank, you do as much damage as you can during sank, you die, and the enemy team has to legitimately end the game before your third medevac if you execute it correctly, or the game's over.
Or there's an ETC standing under the medevac, pressing mosh pit.
You gotta make sure you medevac to the right place. There's an art to it. It's not as easy as it sounds once you have going up against teams who actually know what you're doing instantly from the draft, because the heroes that you need to draft are obviously Material Morales are 2 of them. The rest of them are pretty specific. And it's funny, there's some interesting meta strategies where if you know people are going up against it. For instance, I have medevaced to boss on Sky Temple after getting that top fort, and the enemy team all backed. And then we got boss because it was right there.
Yeah, they were expanding the medevac to expecting the medevac to the keep.
Because you get the notification, medevac coming down. You don't know where it's going, but you assume it's going to the keep if you're familiar with the strategy.
Yeah, Fog of War OP.
Fog of War OP. Yeah, Sky Temple is also where we were used to run that. Since you can just get to the top fort, most of it with the top temple in the first phase, so that had a tendency to. Yeah, we also were big fans of Raynor and Hyperion.
Yeah,
it's the single best hero for taking out core in the very specific scenario that you're all gonna die.
It's bizarre that Raynor's major niche at the moment, because Hammer is usually better than Raynor in pretty much every other way. But when it comes to this strategy, Raynor's actually the best hero because of Hyperion and Inspire. If you do the math, he does the highest damage of anyone that you can pick. So
it's also that it's also that you can front load the damage with Inspire, and then you cannot stop Hyperion damage from going through. Like even if you all die in 5 seconds, Raynor still does a large amount of damage.
But Yeah, okay. So that's like a great example of like something that's legitimate cheese. Like when you draft your whole comp around this one trick, then if you can execute this one trick, you'll win the game, kind of. But it was kind of like when I asked Fabulous here to come on the show earlier today, since Ray got a tree in his house. I like I said, like, yeah, okay, yeah, great that you can be here. By the way, we're gonna talk about some cheese, like just make up some thoughts about it. And he's like, okay, but what do you consider cheese? We kind of went through that, but then he said, like, is double support hyper carry cheese?
No, it's no, absolutely not.
No, because like following the definition, it kind of can be, or maybe not anymore, as long as it's so popular and it's so normal.
I would say the question is whether was it cheese when it started happening, like when OWL got released, for example.
Yeah.
Yes, there were people who were like, pro players were like, oh my god, this is so difficult to deal with, this is so cheesy, nothing ever dies, you can make so many mistakes and still be alive, it's not fair. Like, people were ranting about double support, and people still rant about double support and how like unfun it is to play in their opinion, but it's pretty cheesy. But now it's just part of the meta. You learn to expect it. You know which teams have the flex in their hero pools that they can run double support comfortably, and they win with it, and which teams don't. Fnatic does not have a good track record running double support, except for Tassadar, for instance, so you don't expect that from them, like, ever. But you people know now, so it's not cheesy. But when it came out, people were like calling it cheese all the time, which I think, again, fits the definition really well. If it's understood part of the meta, it's not cheese because you should know. But if it's something teams bring out for the first time and you weren't expecting it, then it's cheese. Especially if you lose. If you lose, everything's cheese.
Yeah, obviously.
Everything is grief.
Yeah, cheese or grief. Take your pick.
I was thinking, if like the Fnatic thingy, double support cheese loses to macro game, right?
Yes.
It should. One of the major weaknesses of most double support comps is that they don't have enough wave clear. So a lot of people will make that mistake, even at the professional level, of not drafting enough wave clear double support, and they'll be like, "We can win team fights," and the other team will be like, "What if we just never fought you?" And the other team's like, "Oh, we didn't think about that." So that happened when double support first came in the meta a couple times, where teams would just be like, "You went drafted double support, you're going to win team fights. We're just not going to fight you."
Yeah, like we had a full episode on the double support meta after the Western Brawl, where the double support meta were decently dominant, and we had Gnap on, and he's just like we don't rarely play it, but it's actually pretty easy to play against. You just outpush them, out clear, rotate, and that seemed to work for them at least.
It's not even just the wave clear factor, it's also that double supports generally have a 4-man that doesn't want to split. So it's like, for example, you have a Wawa comp. Generally, the Wawa wants to have a frontliner, and you want both supports to be with the Wawa. You now have one remaining hero who can like be away from the core of the composition, and the core is still essentially at full strength, which is really crippling when you're dealing with a split push, especially if it's happening on more than one lane.
Yeah. So, like, back to the cheese part. Does anyone have other suggestions or thoughts on specific cheeses that we've seen like through the ages coming up?
I know when Hanamura came out, when the 5-man 1-lane thingy started, that's cheese as well. See, he's laughing. that says it all. I mean,
it was never optimal. Like,
it doesn't matter. I remember like having games on Hanamura being 5 levels ahead just because you picked Sylvanas and they can't deal with the 5-man pushing on 1 lane, and you're just sitting there. Okay, all right, you want to face us? Okay, we have Zarya and Sylvanas. You're never gonna kill us. You lose the soak, we get the structures. Easy. Yeah.
That's a cheesy strategy, and it works. At least it worked. I think that has the most views of any YouTube video of mine, almost 30,000. And people were so mad, but at the same time, I got so many messages from people like, I hated Hanamura. I now only do your strat. I love Hanamura because either it wins incredibly hard, or the enemy team is good enough to counter it. And it's not uncounterable. No strategy in Heroes of the Storm is uncounterable. There's always counterplay to everything. But it has to do with level of execution. 5-man pushing a lane should be really easy because everyone's just like, we're in this lane and until the keep goes down, and then we're going to leave. There's actually optimizations you could have done to that strategy. Like you have a bribe hero, and so you could wait maybe until the you could split in a standard 4-1 until the first bribable camp spawns, and then you grab those camps, and you'll actually spike to 4 ahead of your opponents if you do that at the right time, and then you go push the Fortis 5, and so you have a solo laner who's getting the soak for a little bit. Like, but that's a far more complicated way of doing it. My video is just about the easiest possible implementation of that strategy, which is 5-man push to a lane and have enough sustain and siege potential that you can just stay there forever and push and have bribe for experience spikes and the heal item. Especially if you draft a double support, the heal item essentially gives you 3 supports whenever there's a full collapse, which is a really, really big deal. And I think any strategy that ignores the objective is going to be a little bit cheesy in a lot of players' minds because the game emphasizes how important the objective is so much. But like Infernal Shrines, the first 2 Punishers aren't that impactful. So, we've seen tankless Illidan comps on Infernal Shrines with Abathur. And we saw that, one time. It was Brainpower when Glowering was on it. And they struggled till 10, and then after 10, the game was completely one-sided because the first 2 Punishers did nothing to get the enemy team into any sort of lead. All they did was set the delay long enough so that the Abathur soak could, make it happen. And any split soaking hero is, for a long time, was considered super cheesy because the team would just delay the objective. So Abathur was inherently cheesy. Vikings were inherently cheesy. Zagara, who didn't come, or Gazla, who doesn't come, is inherently cheesy because split push or split soak is just somehow not something you can ever adjust to because you're supposed to come to the objective. Damn it, that's how this works.
Play by my rules.
When New Haunted Mines came out, pushing as 4 and ignoring the objective and just getting sapper camps and drafting someone who had a Merklord talent so that the sappers got even more value. Like you would execute it correctly if the enemy team all went in the mines for skulls, you were pretty much guaranteed to get a fort if you did that. And then you could actually, if they were really slow, you could rotate up, grab the other sapper camp and get the other fort. So you'd get 2 forts in the first golem phase, and their 100 skull golem, because it's so weak in the early game, would get a wall. And obviously the 3,200 experience you got from getting both walls and both forts is way more than the 800 experience they got for getting a wall. And at that point, you're just so far ahead, you can snowball the game and it's over. But
I remember having like I think like it was like 2-stack team week, and I was trying to tell the team to like not go into the mines and instead do the sapper camps. And then the 3-stack like went into the mines one by one, died. I took the sapper camps by myself as Merklord Sonya, and I ended up out pushing the 100 skull golem alone, without the team. Like even the team was feeding.
Haunted Mine Sappers with Mercenary Queen is pretty nice. I was just happy that I got to play Sylvanas again after Haunted Mines rework. But maybe I'll get to do that more now after she was played a lot in the Eastern Clash I saw, and I'm really happy about that because I love my Sylvanas.
Chinese teams have always liked her.
Yeah, maybe I'll just have to move there. Start a podcast. The Slothcast. I don't know. Okay. There's 2 things that I think about. You mentioned Vikings, and Vikings in kind of being inherently cheesy, but then actually isn't because it's so normal in a way. But we have seen like Vikings with 1 Viking in each lane, and then the rest of the team in the bottom lane with the Sylvanas just pushing. Is like, does it become cheesy then?
So in my mind, the objective of the game is to kill the core. I know people forget that sometimes because they just want to think the objective is to kill enemy heroes. The objective of the game is actually to kill the core. So in my mind, any strategy that involves you attacking buildings directly is the standard baseline strategy, and every other strategy exists as counterplay to that. So team fighting exists as counterplay to pushing because you need to be able to kill or make them back off. The objective should be something you think about. What am I going to get the value of the objective in terms of push? If an objective will give you 0 push value, and Towers of Doom is a weird exception because of the way the core health mechanic works. But even then, converting the bell towers does give you additional shots, so it still technically gives you core damage. The question should always be, what is the push value of the objective? And if you can get the push value of the objective in some other way, then you should just do that instead. 100% of the time. So no macro strategy, in my mind, it can be cheesy. And every Viking strategy, regardless of whether or not you have a 4-man that's pushing or a 4-man that's roaming for picks, is cheesy because they're all macro strategies. And it shows the evolution of the general understanding of the game by the community that macro strategies at first were considered odd by even pro teams back in 2014 when wave clear became the standard and people started doing 4-man rotations. Literally, a Blizzard developer in 2014 said, "We never expected this to happen." The first time a pro team did a 4-man rotation, they were like, it was Dragonshire, and they were just rotating mid bot with a soul lane, and Blizzard developers were like, we never saw anyone do that before.
What did you do?
So wave clear and macro suddenly became standard and very hard to deal with. You needed to seriously consider wave clear in your draft. And then people were like, okay, what if we just killed their wave clear heroes? And then you had the counterplay of pick fights or pick comps. And that information has slowly trickled down to the rest of the community, where now finally people are like, I understand every lane needs to be soaked. I understand that if we win a fight, we should go try and kill buildings. People are still like, if we get a camp, the camp will kill the building for us. They haven't quite made the connection that it's faster to do it themselves. At least the average player has not. But, we're getting there. And so in my mind, macro comps can't be cheesy. But
there's just one other thing that springs to mind before we round off the cheese, and that Frogo, as he has a Heroes Launch match to play. Fnatic. Mid-season brawl. I think it was versus Dignitas in the final when they did the Sky Temple thing with Chen pushing. I think it was bot lane. They got to 1% core after like 5 minutes or something.
It was winners finals, and they had, I believe, Chen, Dehaka, Oreo, Vawa, and Karazin. I think that was the comp. And they actually started top, but it was pretty interesting. Like it was a timed strategy, where basically the whole point is that they just double soak with the Haka, then they push the other lane with the Chen 4-man, and Chen is the tank in this composition. He's the best sieging tank because he can tank tower shots freely, and then. This made sure that they had 10. They had 10, and then they could use the 10 spike to do boss, and then they just tried to win core, and they got it to 1%.
Yeah, that ended up being a 15, 16-minute game, something like that. But Fnatic ended up winning. And again, that's a push composition. You draft enough sustain. It's a 3-lane map, so you draft an offlaner who can keep you up in experience in the other lanes. And you just trade the fact that you're missing some minion soak for the fact that you're getting a really good rate of return on building experience.
Yeah.
And it's.
Do you think Dignitas saw that coming at all? Like, I got the draft there from the producer, and like they drafted like normally, like with the Genji, Uther,
and then there's the last rotation, Chen Monk.
Yeah. And Fnatic did Chen Monk last, and yeah.
And it's the downside of Genji. It's the downside of any sort of Genji composition, because he doesn't have any wave clear, which means in order to be relevant in the early game, he has to secure rotational picks, or at least do enough damage on rotations that he pressures someone back and forces them to tap, or forces them to Hearth, which keeps them off the map, right? And then you can take that advantage of having them off the map to fix your lanes, get them pushed back in correctly, and not miss anything. But if you have an offlaner who can't die and double support in a 4-man and you're just pushing, Genji can't do anything. You just remove Genji from the equation, right? Genji's just no longer a hero. And then you're in a 5v4, essentially, in the early game. And Fnatic can win a 5v4. I'm pretty sure that's something they can do.
Yeah. Quick question about that draft. Why did they draft Monk at last? What's his role in this? Jeez.
He does a lot of structure damage for a support.
Monk has some of the highest single target damage of any of the supports. So you already have Ariel for your sustain. She's being generated hope by the Vala. If any heroes are there, Vala is going to give you all the hope you need to keep everyone topped off. But Monk has reasonable sustain in a situation where you're just group up and pushing, and you need a certain amount of sustain versus building damage. And Ariel can't do that because her PvE hope generation is so much lower.
Is it like this, or?
But then he also just has really high single target damage, which helps you push structures down faster. In that game, I'm actually looking at the stats here. The Monk did 36,000 siege damage, which is quite a lot for a support in a 15-minute game.
Yeah, 36. Yeah. Yeah, there was overall a lot of siege damage on every member of Fnatic that game.
Oh yeah, I mean Quacknix's on Vala was almost 80,000, like just shy of 80,000, which is insane.
Yeah, that was an interesting game for sure. Yeah, I don't think neither Dignitas, casters, analyzers, or any of us that was watching was seeing that coming. And yeah, I've seen it been tried later, but it hasn't worked out as good as. I think it's just really timing based. Like you really need to.
It's really hard to pull off. Wubby, Ozzy, our offlaner, is also a big advantage because Wubby's one of the best offlaners in the world by a good margin. So the fact that he could miss very very little soak and be consistent, but it's really macro comps are really good ways of punishing low wave per compositions in general, and push comps are good at it. And anytime someone first picks Genji, you can draft to beat Genji in a team fight. Like it is possible, but why bother when you could just be like, well, you pick Genji? Genji's not very good in the early game unless you can get picks. What if we drafted a comp that could push in and you could never kill it, and we just ended the game before Genji became relevant? What if that happened?
I was wondering, because I don't think I've actually seen this strategy executed again. I've seen solo tank, I've seen Chen as the tank compositions, but they weren't push comps. I saw a superficially similar draft from Expert, but it was actually but that wasn't actually a push comp. It was basically a triple support Wawa, and the Chen was bait, and they actually just wanted the team fight.
And that's the beauty of Heroes of the Storm, that you have these same heroes that in slightly different, you swap one thing out, the composition can be a fundamentally different thing. And it's one of the reasons drafting is so incredibly difficult. The key in almost all cases is practice. You have to practice composition. So Fnatic has been together as a roster for so long, and they're also knowledgeable about the game. They all have each individual player has really high game knowledge. If you took a lot of teams have one person who's sort of the brain of the team, and everyone else listens to them and has good mechanics. Fnatic has 5 people who could be the brain of a team pretty comfortably. And that means that they have a wide variety of strategies because they're constantly thinking and innovating and trying to talk about things. But also, they can pull something out and be like, okay, this is how we're going to execute this strategy. And then they just execute it. And maybe it's not perfect, but because people haven't seen it before, they can just do it. They can be pulling out these random things, and they understand how it's going to work because they've done similar things. Like they have such a broad range of strategies, and it's amazing as a team that their roster's been together for so long and they have that level of game knowledge.
So for the most part, we can summarize it by, if you want to pay attention to cheese, just look at Fnatic's games because they will innovate things. We'll see how it all works out, but yeah, I like myself some stinky cheese, and I love that the game makes it possible to mix things up once in a while. We're going to go to another break now, and after the break, Froge will not be among us anymore. No, he is not very ill with a deadly disease. He just has to go and play a Heroes Lounge game. So we're going to say goodbye to him right now, and then I'm going to say kiitoksia paljolti näyttelistä, Froge.
That was awful.
Doesn't mean anything?
I mean, it sounded like you were trying to say thank you very much, but then you like messed up both the tense and the pronunciation, so it's like it wasn't actually finished.
I'll say it was close enough. I tried. Google Translate said that was thanks for coming on the show in Froge's native Suomi language. I hope you had a decent time.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, thanks for having me, and goodbye.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the show, and good luck in your match. For everyone else, we're going to jump into a short break, and when we'll get back, we'll talk a little bit about drafting. So see you in a few seconds. Here we are once more, as we can't finish an episode with Cavalier here without talking about drafting. Yeah, you remember correctly, we have done an episode on drafting earlier, but times they are a-changing. We get new heroes, balance patches, and an overall change in the meta that will affect the way we go into a draft. So it's just right that we are taking an updated look at it, and right after the mid-season brawl at Remac, we did an own episode on the double support meta, which everyone played, but it doesn't seem to be as dominant anymore, Cav.
No, it doesn't. People have learned to play against it, which is a big thing, and people have learned to draft around it, and there's macro compositions. We talked about that in the previous segment a little bit, that can run circles around double support. So you have to not only have the sustain, but then do something with the sustain to get an advantage, or have some way to force a fight. And it took people a while to figure out all the aspects of that. So,
in what way do you feel that changes the priority on the healers in the draft?
So we're in kind of a weird meta right now, in the sense that I think healers in general are stronger than other roles. There's Uther and Ariel at the top tier, and then for the off supports you have Tassadar, and if you have a Medivh player, Medivh, really high up there. But all the damage dealers are kind of just okay. Either there can be a hope generator for Ariel, or they can't, and if they can't, then other than Greymane, you don't necessarily have to draft them early on to get priority on them. And then there's a limited number of really top tier tanks. And when you have a limited number of a role, and then you can run more than one of it, you end up in drafting situations where you're like, well, we can ban one, and we can take two, and then they have to take one, and that means that you get a hero you want on the back end because you constrained their draft a little bit. And if they don't do that, then you can just completely lock them out of the top tier choices. So we've seen more of that to a large degree. We've seen more intelligent drafting constraints, and it really just has to do with the fact that healers are really strong, tanks are really strong. A lot of the damage heroes are sort of similar in what they can do, so people are targeting the smaller pools, which is why people keep saying we need more supports, we need more tanks. And people are starting to advocate, a third ban in drafting. But as long as we're in this situation where you can completely choke someone out of most of the viable options in a role, it's probably won't add more bans just yet.
I can really quick ask your opinion on that, Fabulous. Do we need more bans in Heroes of the Storm?
No. I think the current meta is actually pretty fun to play compared to other metas that we had before. There's a lot of viable stuff actually in the game right now. I mean, there are also a lot of heroes that are just not viable at all, but well, that happens to every game, I guess. But I think as of now, being second pick feels so much better than being first pick in general, because you just have so much more options, and often enough, happened, at least to me, that we first pick Oriel, for example. They went Uther or whatever, and we actually forced to win an Oriel comp, which isn't really great. I think Oriel isn't good for the game in general. I don't like her because she's, yeah, if she works out, she's pretty broken. And yeah, it's just not fun to play with or against her. So, but yeah.
Let's just talk about Oriel a little bit. As we not long ago after Uther's rework, he was severely buffed. He was kind of one of the coming back to that, the priority heroes in the draft, especially like with no doubt the best support. But from like I don't have the stats, but from what I can remember, I've seen a lot of Oriel first ban for a pick. Especially in the Eastern Brawl now, but also in the Western Brawl.
Well, yeah, like Ori said.
Was there a weird question in there?
Yeah, of course. Every sentence that I say has a question mark on its end. But like, what's her position at the moment?
If you have a hope generator, Ariel's the best support in the game. That's her position.
And she doesn't need a secondary support to be that effective.
She doesn't need a secondary support in most drafts. She certainly can benefit from having a secondary support. Ariel Uther is extremely strong. And we saw Expert run triple support with an Ariel one time. It was Arthas, Sonya, Malfuri, and Ariel Lily on Battlefield of Eternity. Lily was the hope generator.
Interesting.
Not sure they'll ever see that again, but we might. That wasn't even perfectly optimal because Ariel's level 7 talent, Bursting Light, is really good if you have a strong hope generator. Lily's not like a super strong hope generator, so he actually ADRD played Ariel. He actually picked a different talent. That game would have been even more one-sided than it was, and the game was pretty one-sided, believe it or not. So yeah, Ariel with the correct hope generator is just the best support in the game, and it has to do with a lot of things. It has to do with the sheer throughput of her healing. Post 7, 2-second cooldown. If your generator is good, you can just spam it like every 2 seconds, and you'll have nearly a full hope bar. Just a lot of throughput. It's area healing. So if the team can't get punished for grouping up, then everyone gets a full heal, which is pretty insane. Imagine if you like doubled the value of Karazim's heal and cut the cooldown in half. It'd be reasonable, right? The major weakness that you always have with hypercarry comps is dive, because people dive on the hypercarry and kill them, and then you're screwed. But Detainment Strike acts as reasonable peel, and it's a stun. Her major weakness is she doesn't have cleanse, but then she has Aegis at 10 on a relatively short cooldown. And you put all those things together, and it's very difficult, to the point where if a hero can be an Ariel battery, they're automatically viable in this meta, which is one of the reasons that we saw Cho'Gall in Korea a few games, and Korean teams talked seriously about Cho'Gall's viability overall. We didn't actually end up seeing him in Eastern Clash. We saw him banned a couple times, but we didn't actually see him taken. And Ariel is just really, really strong. She also has reasonable wave clear for the 4-man. Swift Sweep will about half kill a wave. Right from level 1, which means that she can enable her team to rotate with her. And since you always need to be with your battery, that's really important. If you wanted to not touch Ariel's healing in any way, but wanted to significantly nerf her, you could actually make it so her Q didn't do damage to minions, and her viability would drop off a lot.
But okay, so I obviously have a master plan behind all of this. So where I'm going is that we now know that supports are really strong, like in itself. You mentioned that earlier compared to the others, the other types of heroes. And Oriel is the strongest, with probably Uther right behind.
Yeah.
And that leads us into, when do you draft? Where do you prioritize them in the draft?
First pick or first ban? Right up there.
It's as easy as that. If you are the first pick and the enemy you don't ban either of them, and the enemy bans one, then you will pick up the second.
Yep.
Pretty much.
Yep.
So would you ever ban out one of them yourself as the first pick?
You would, because of what's become known as the Holy Trinity, which is really any two really strong support heroes and then a hyper carry. But usually people are talking about Tassadar. And so you have this risk that if you don't ban one as first pick, and then they don't ban Tassadar, you pick up either Ariel or Uther, and then they pick up Tassadar and the other one.
Yeah.
And then there's enough hyper carries in the game that you can't pick or ban all of them, so they're guaranteed to get one on the back end. And now they have the Holy Trinity and you don't. The counter to this is that there are other enabling heroes like Medivh, but not every team has a Medivh player. And it makes drafting pretty interesting and pretty complicated. Hero pools have started to become a significant issue for some teams. There are teams that straight up don't have a Medivh player, which means that they don't really have any sort of response to running their own, head-to-head hyper carry versus hyper carry style of composition. And it's interesting the way drafting has started to shape up. Fnatic had a draft that a lot of people were very critical at the time, but they picked Lunara Medivh as their 1-2 slot in this meta, where this support dynamic is really, really critical, right? But the Medivh can deal with any burst, and the first pickup on their opposing team was I'm actually going to look up the draft, but it was a way of enabling burst, basically. And it was one of the supports that really enables you to go hard into a fight. And one of the ways you punish Medivh is Lunara, because the damage over time, spreading out over multiple heroes, is something Force of Will does absolutely nothing against.
Yeah.
And so by picking up the counter to burst, which is what they're going to draft or what they should draft if they're following a typical draft, and then picking up the counter to the thing you just drafted, you don't leave a lot of tools on the table to deal with it for the enemy team. And I want to find this draft now because I can't remember what that first pick was, and it was so clever. It's very frustrating. Okay, it's Infernal Shrines, Fnatic versus Team Expert playoffs, Western Clash, and the first pick was Greymane, right? So the first pick was Greymane on Infernal Shrines, and they were just like, well, that's going to be pretty bursty. Pick up Medivh, we pick up the counter to Medivh, and Team Expert responded with Diablo, which is even more, and Genji. So really looking for those picks. And this was the Butcher game for Expert. I don't know why the Butcher's there. I don't know why that happened, but I think Team Expert was just desperate at this point. But the first rotation of this draft was so clever, and Ariel Uther did not get picked or banned in this draft by either team. That's how awkward that first rotation from Fnatic made them end up feeling. So there are ways of dealing with it, but it is difficult to draft around.
Yeah.
It's actually insane how much impact Medivh has on the game if you have a Medivh player in your team.
Oh, yeah.
I've sadly never experienced it since I'm not capable of playing him, and I don't know anyone I've played with, I think. Oh yeah, actually, my tank player had Medivh on level 60. Feels bad, man.
If I were ever going to one-trick a hero, it would be Medivh.
Yeah, you can make some plays with him, definitely. And playing against one that's really good is extremely annoying. Just to mention that, Medivh, though, unless you have... No, I'm just thinking... Let's, where he fits into a draft, do you do roll 20, aka you always draft him if you have a good player on it?
I'm not going to say you can always draft him because he does have, we talked about Lunara already. There are other ways of dealing with him. Big displacements are a really good way of dealing with him because you put the portal down, someone comes through it, you instantly displace them away from the portal, they can't retreat at that point. In Korean Hero League, when Zarya came out, Zarya was considered a counter to Medivh because you could expulsion zone the portal exit. and then boom, you're stuck there and you have to fight.
Oh, well,
fighting
yeah,
against. It's rough. So there are ways of dealing with Medivh. I'm not going to say you should pick him every single time, but there are a lot of situations where Medivh is very difficult to deal with. Task Tracer is really popular right now, and if you have a really good Medivh player, you can let Task Tracer through on purpose and then pick Medivh on the back end of the draft, and then Pulse Bomb will literally never kill anyone. So I'm not going to say you should always pick him, but there are a number of situations where you can set up for a Medivh pick, and it constrains or counters the enemy team's draft. The big problem is you need to have a good Medivh player, and your team needs to have practiced playing Medivh comps as a team, which
it's kind
takes
of
some time.
Like we saw with Roll20, as we mentioned, there Diablo Medivh combo thing. That's obviously that's obviously something they've spent hours on, like to get that synergy down, and it's really, really beautiful when it works.
Is Glowing the Medivh player? Why?
Glowing is the Medivh player, yeah.
Yeah, I just think you need to have someone who's actually pretty vocal as well, because you need to know when stuff happens.
If your shot caller is your Medivh player and they can shot call and play Medivh at the same time, you're going to be in good shape.
Yeah. Ouch.
I think that's a really good lesson to take away from this. All the Heroes League teams out there, put your shot caller and at Medivh and just make him practice for 100 hours, and you'll start to win games. We kind of were touching upon it, but for a while, for a decently long while, at least it felt like this, you had 3 heroes that were always first pick, first banned. It was Anubarak, Genji, and Uther. Then we saw some nerfs, some changes to Cocoon and stuff like that. And it's not that they're not that dominant anymore. Do we have something like that at the moment, like a group of heroes that you will always pick or ban in the early rotation?
I would say Taz, Oriel.
Yeah, I mean, Tass and Ariel are the only 2 that come to mind. Really, Genji was there for a little while, and for some teams, Genji's still there, because basically a lot of teams that early pick Genji are saying our execution's good enough that we can make this work regardless of what you pick. But there are, you draft enough high health pool heroes, and draft enough sustain. It's hard for Genji to get the pick-offs that he's looking for, even in the laning phase of the game. And if you draft enough point and click lockdown, it's hard for him to deal with mobility. I think actually one of the reasons that Brightwing came back into the meta is she is a direct counter to Genji in both the macro sense of she's a support with a global, and in the point and click CC sense of Genji comes in, he's in a lot of trouble, and then everyone stays stopped off. But yeah, I'm not sure. Other than Ariel and Tassadar, I'm not sure there's heroes that people are super prioritizing. I think the game has gotten more nuanced in that most teams are now going into the draft with a plan from the get-go. And if they get it overpowered hero, maybe the plan changes and they'd be like, oh, we left Ariel open, we're okay with taking Ariel, that's fine. Or they left Tassadar open, we're okay with taking Tassadar. But they go into the draft with a specific plan, and they think about what heroes that they're going to pick up for their plan to work, and what heroes don't reveal their plan but are somewhat sort of standard, and then the plan comes in at the back end of the draft. So drafting has become a lot better in most regions.
I might be wrong, but this Stitches a go-to first pick, first ban? Like, no, he's not a ban worth, but
he does not get banned. He does occasionally get first picked. And with the nerfs to Anubarak, his first pick rate increased quite a bit. And it comes back to that discussion we were having. There's a limited number of good tanks. There's a limited number of good supports. Generally speaking, outside of the teams who prioritize prioritize Genji and the occasional first pick Greymane, because Greymane is just never a bad pick, really. You generally see first pick support or first pick tank. So Stitches being first pick is not unheard of. It's normally in the second slot. The big thing with Stitches is that he needs to be drafted with follow-up CC, which means that usually you pick him if you can guarantee that you're going to get the Uther, or you're forced to go into like a Kael'thas, which is something we've seen from Dignitas occasionally. or you see a Brightwing, or sometimes people will be like, well, then we have to pick Mouth, and then how do we mitigate the fact that we don't have a cleanse?
Yeah, I see a lot of stitches in the early rotations before the second ban phase. I do, and it's almost kind of surprisingly as like his kit is still the same as before. Yeah, he's slowly over time gotten buffs to his health and stuff like that. But I don't know. Yeah, there's so much that hinges on hitting hooks. If you don't do that, then you're just mostly just walking around with a large health pool, and that works too. It's just like the lack of playmaking ability without the hooks. I guess I've seen some, like you mentioned, we've practiced. We did a lot of Stitches KT, and it's really hard to play the KT when you go around waiting for a hook to land and you're holding your stun for it the whole game because the hook never lands. And yeah.
Well, I mean, he also does a significant amount of damage. He has a lot of weight there with this slam build.
Yeah.
And so, like, yeah, we've seen games where literally pro players, they never missed a hook or they hit 27 hooks in a row or something. But you just really need one late game hook for Stitch's Q to be relevant, right? One kill in the late game that ends up snowballing the game because of a staggered death or an objective cap or whatever, or boss capture, is enough. So it's not that, and in the early game, you'll actually often see what I call exploratory hooks. They'll just be like, they're probably rotating through there, and it just throws the hook out. If it hits someone, great. If it doesn't, oh well, not that big a deal. It's actually one of the major reasons that Fishing Hook used to be the pickup at 16, because it resulted in a lot more "oops, we win the game" sort of hooks. You happen to be standing in the wrong place. I'm sorry.
Someone was there. Yeah.
But with Slam Build having so much synergy, we've seen more Pulverize at 16 instead. But it really just one hook in the late game can be enough to justify the Stitches pick, as long as he does everything else well enough. And he doesn't have a great escape, except for Putrid Vial, his heroic, but he has enough sustain and enough health that he can escape slowly and still live. So
yeah,
he works as a solo tank.
Yeah, he just feels super flexible. Like that, there's probably never going to be a situation in the draft where you block yourself into something by picking Stitches. So yeah, that's probably why he's one of the earlier rotations.
We kind of can't leave this without mentioning also the hyper carry that we were on a little bit earlier. But then we only talked about the supports. When I think hyper carry, I think Vala, I think Lunara, and in newer times Cassia. Should I broaden my hyper carry horizon?
I think it's fair to say that those are the three big ones. When you're talking about Abathur comps, I think you could add Greymane in there, because double Greymane is so incredibly terrifying. But normally at this point in the game, when people are talking about hyper carries, they're actually talking about hope generators, right? Because it ties back into the Oriole style of play. So it's just they have to be a ranged hero. There's no melee hyper carries that can do enough damage for an entire team, in a team fight, such that the rest of your team can focus solely on keeping them alive, and they'll do literally enough damage to kill the entire enemy team. And it doesn't work if it's cooldown based, unless the cooldowns are very, very short, because it has to be sustained damage. And in that sense, Vala does that level of damage, Cassie does that level of damage, Lunara does that level of damage, Gall does that level of damage. I don't know if that's always a little bit of a risky one for people, because then you're like, man, but then you have to have Cho. If you could draft just Gall, people would probably be pretty excited.
That would be great.
Just put Gall onto Stitches.
Yeah, and then Gul'dan with the Q build in certain metas has been a hyper carry, because his Q cooldown is so short, and the damage he ends up doing from it in the late game is so high that he sort of fits that mold. And that's it. A lot of people are like, what about Li Ming? What about Chromie? They do a lot of damage, and it's cooldown based. The cooldowns are too long, and it's not reliable damage because it's skill shot based or something else. Their burst follow up to CC chains, great. Hyper carry, not so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you mentioned Gul'dan too, and I think Gul'dan works great as a hope battery, like really good. But
Oh yeah.
yeah, again, as a hyper carry, yeah, I guess I would at least prefer any of the other three. But you mentioned something else, Abathur comp. That's something different because I've seen a lot of Tassadars with an Illidan, and Abathur Illidan works pretty great, and of course also the Abathur Greymane. But that's not a hypercarry comp. That's something else. But you still kind of.
It's interesting because double Greymane does do enough damage to carry a team, right? So it's not just the Greymane alone that's doing the damage. It's Greymane and then the Abathur clone of Greymane. No talents, but 20% additional damage, 20% additional movement speed. It's a lot of damage. So do you count that? Like if you didn't have the Greymane to clone, the comp wouldn't work. But Greymane alone is not doing all the work. But the clone helps also keep the Greymane alive, so it still sort of fits that definition of it's a comp where one hero is contributing enough that if everyone else works to keep them alive, you'll win. And it's just it's a tough question. How do you want to define that? We've seen it win, we've seen it lose. A lot of different teams in a lot of different regions have run Abathur Greymane compositions. I personally don't like Illidan, Tassadar, and then another backliner that benefits heavily from Tassadar's shield from the leeching, because it gives Tassadar 2 targets that he wants to shield, and it comes down to who's going to eat cooldowns, who's positioned in a certain way that they can get the most value out of it. And really good teams will be like, the shield's on this person, that means this person's vulnerable. Let's try and dive this person. Let's use this 8-second window to change targets. And we've seen that. We've seen Fnatic go up against Fnatic in particular go up against Tassadar comps, and they're like, that guy's shielded, this guy's not. That guy's gonna die.
Target switch.
Yeah, and the major reason for that is both players are depending on that shield because both feel like their hero is going to get a lot of benefit out of it, which is true, and they need to always acknowledge they need to have like I almost want to say teams should have a primary target for the shield. They'd be like, you're going to get the shield the majority of the time. The other player should be like, okay, I'm not going to go in or be too far forward unless cooldowns have been used and I know I'm going to be safe. But I don't think teams do that, and so frequently it's just target switch and die.
Yeah, I played some in like when you mentioned that I played some team league with like okay, I'm playing Lunara because we get the Tassadar early rotation seems good, or pick up the Tracer or something, and then I just never get the shields because Tassadar shields himself. Bzzz. He's gonna rack up the self healing. Really short before we round off the drafting discussion here. Do you draft hyper carry double healer without Oriole?
Oh sure, you can have Uther Tassadar. You could have Brightwing Tassadar. You could have Medivh.
Are you still then confined to the 3 hyper carries that we talked about earlier, since you don't need the high hope generation?
You're not. You could aim for something more late game, like a Nazeebo with Vile Infection, and you have those power spikes at 16 and 20. But then you have to accept the fact that until 16 and 20, your hyper carry isn't a hyper carry.
Yeah, I see.
So that's a little bit of a concern, and obviously in a coordinated environment, you can play safe and macro and try not to fall behind. That's your objective. You're not going to win until 16 and really 20. But you can play slow and not lose too hard. In uncoordinated, that's just a big risk, except for the fact that in uncoordinated, players generally don't fall up on advantages, so in some ways it's easier to get the late game power spikes in less coordinated environments than it is in more coordinated environments. I can't think of one outside of Nazeebo offhand, honestly.
Yeah.
But there are other heroes that in the late game can do enough damage to count, but they're not early game heroes and they don't have the early game advantages. So you have to play patiently, and it's a different dynamic.
Yeah, we'll just have to wait and see. Knowing this game and knowing Fnatic and stuff, we may suddenly see from them hypercarry Gaslow at BlizzCon. Like, who knows? But
That's
we are
not going to happen.
We'll see.
Oh, Zul'jin. Zul'jin's another example.
Zul'jin, yeah.
He does enough damage, especially once he finishes his quest. Has that range, and then you basically, it's kind of funny because you know he's going to die. The question is, how many people can he trade for?
Yeah,
and
take with him.
With Tazdingo, he should end up trading for more than enough people.
We are pushing 2 hours now, so we really need to round off. Both because we were pushing 2 hours and because my girlfriend actually has a birthday today. And
happy birthday!
Yeah, I'll tell her.
Tell her I said happy birthday.
Yeah, I bet she won't be mad at me for spending 3 hours with you guys anymore since she got that. But we could probably be here all night talking about heroes.
You could tell her a guy wearing a bow tie said it, and she might forgive you.
Yeah, I think you will be the first guy with a bow tie she gets a birthday wish from today.
There you go.
Maybe, but yeah, we could probably have talked Heroes of the Storm all night with this gang. We have to round off for now, but luckily the Slothcast will be back next week with more information that helps you win more games. For now, really quick, UwImFabolous, you're a real hero stepping in today now that Ray couldn't make it. Thanks a lot for that. I hope we didn't completely ruin your Sunday.
No, everything is fine. I had to quit playing PUBG, but that happens. And I don't have any shoutouts since I had them the last 2 weeks, so yeah.
Okay. So shout out to your new team that's about to pick you up.
Yeah. Your name could be somewhere.
Yeah. Lastly, a huge thanks to CavalierGuest for getting up early on a Sunday morning and joining a European podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's fun, as always. Hopefully I'll get to come back on again sometime.
Hopefully you'll have the patience to come on again sometime. Where can people find you on the internet?
You can find me at twitch.tv/CavalierGuest. You can find me on Twitter at CavalierGuest. Basically, I'm CavalierGuest everywhere. It's pretty easy to find me. YouTube.com/C/CavalierGuest. And I do a lot of Heroes of the Storm content, high-end analysis of pro play and drafting. That's sort of my niche. I do, and actually I have a sub button now, and I do sub replay reviews. So if you're a sub, you get entered into a raffle every Thursday, and you get to have your review, one of your replays professionally reviewed. So it's sort of a neat thing that I've started to do.
It's pretty good content. I recommend you all check that out. He also has a Discord channel, which are pretty interesting most of the time. You can also find him at flickr.com/CavalierGuest, myspace.com/CavalierGuest, and napster.com/CavalierGuest. All the
Does MySpace still exist?
I really don't know.
In 2K17.
.com. MySpace still exists.
MySpace still exists. Who would have known? I better make a Slothcast page there as soon as the show is done. As for myself, you can find me at _Narsha on Twitter and hang around a Discord near you pretty much all the time. And we all would really appreciate if you click that subscribe button if you watch this on YouTube. You can give us a follow on Twitter at SlothcastHots, or just tell your friends, neighbors, side chicks, whoever. We'll be back in a week's time, and if you have any suggestions, questions, feedback, segments we should talk about, or anything at all, just get in touch. Thanks to the production crew and everyone that's listening to this at one point in time. And until next time, everyone, good luck and have feeds.